I just finished running my first game of Daggerheart ever, and I have a lot of thoughts on it. I want to go over the good things and the bad things about it, but first, I want to talk about the thing on everybody's mind. Duality dice. Is this hard for the DM? Is it a burden to put on a DM? Short answer, as my first time playing, yes, it is hard. It's hard to improv all those different possibilities the dice could roll. But first, maybe I'll give an introduction to that for those who are not aware. In Daggerheart, the Duality dice system is 2d12, 1d12 for hope and 1d12 for fear. You roll these two together, and if the hope die is higher, you have rolled with hope. If the fear die is higher, you have rolled with fear. This means that you can succeed with fear, or you can fail with hope. So, what does that mean exactly? And how is this difficult for DMs? Well, normally in D&D 5e, you have just success or fail. You're trying to jump over this ledge and you either succeed or you don't. In Daggerheart, you can succeed, but something bad happens even though you do succeed. Success with fear. Or you can fail, but have some sort of hope. It's not as bad. Or you can have a complete failure, failure with fear. Or you can have a complete success, success with hope. Or you can have a super success, which is just a critical, which means both die have the same number. So we end up having 5 different options for every roll of the die. And yeah, it's difficult to improv all that. Having said that though, I don't think it's going to be as bad as people think it is. For long-term Daggerheart campaigns, which is what it's meant to be for, I think that DMs will quickly get used to how this system works and become more confident in the way that they improv, just like any skill. And I think it's just going to take a mindset shift for 5e DMs to be confident in Daggerheart, which I think is fair. Having said that, I don't think Daggerheart is a system that is actually supposed to be rolling a lot of checks. And if we're not rolling a lot of checks, this problem is decreased quite a bit. Let me go into why I think this. First of all, unlike in 5e, the DM can't just call for rolls anytime all they want, because every time someone rolls, there's a resource being added either to the players or to the DM. So the players either end up accumulating a bunch of hope and they become stronger, or you as the DM will accumulate fear tokens. And this is going to give you power, but it also is going to encourage you as a GM to act, to introduce something new into the scene that they can interact with. So that will therefore spur things along in a different way. And that means there are important checks coming up instead of some useless checks. The second reason that we'll probably see less rolls in Daggerheart than 5e is that every roll in Daggerheart is meant to shift the narrative. It's meant to introduce something to the story that wasn't there before, perhaps. Let me read you this quote from the rule set. In Daggerheart, every time you roll the dice, the scene changes in some way. There's no such thing as a roll where nothing happens, because the fiction should constantly be evolving based on the successes and failures of the characters. A failure should never mean that a character simply doesn't get what they want, especially when that would result in a moment of inaction. Every action the players take should yield an active outcome, something that changes the situation they're in. This means that all of the rolls that don't amount to anything in 5e can be completely done away with, because they're not adding anything to the narrative. You as the DM can just decide if they succeed or fail based on their character, their experiences and their background and their class. I've seen so many 5e content creators talk about how you need to roll less in games anyway, so I think this sounds like a good move. Lastly, the DM in Daggerheart is not incentivized to make a bunch of skill checks like they are in 5e. In 5th edition, players will make a selection of skills that they are proficient in, something that their character is defined by. And so as a DM, you want to encourage them to use those skills, and you want to challenge them so that those skills actually matter and are important. Daggerheart, however, doesn't have skills. It just has experiences which sub in for skills. It's really smooth and neat, and I love it a lot. It's just lifted right off of 13th Age, which I can't complain about. It's a great system. Insight Check on his video about this also noticed that the lack in skills will likely result in less rolls. So because of these factors, I think Daggerheart is primed to have a lot less roles in general than 5e. So yes, it might be a little more difficult to handle those roles as a new DM, but the fact that we're making less roles somewhat compensates for that. And over time, as we get more skilled, the speed of the game will go up dramatically, I believe. So a lot of people are worried that it's going to be really hard for GMs, and I do think it's going to be a big mindset shift, and it will be difficult to jump into Daggerheart initially. But I think after you've run a couple sessions, it'll be pretty smooth. Now, this conversation about the duality dice is heavily linked to the fear mechanic, and I love this mechanic as a GM. It is so cool. It gives you a lot of flexibility and a lot of options as a GM to really shift things up, to change things, and to bring some balance or scale it back based on how your players need it. In combat, you can use it to make your monsters more powerful, you can use it to make them act more, or to activate some special abilities. Outside of battle, you can use it for a lot of things as well. You can give advantage or disadvantage to rolls. They also suggest that you can use them to introduce new elements into the campaign, things that were never described before. The example they give in the text is that you can bring in a sudden thunderstorm as the players are scaling a tower. I think narratively that's interesting. You might think, as a DM, you can just do that anyway and it doesn't matter. But if you are expending fear, a resource of yours as a DM, to activate something, to change the environment, it builds some trust with the players. They feel like, yeah, we're doing well, and so you are expending resources to bring us some difficulty. And that's kind of what you're meant to do as a DM regardless. I really enjoyed being able to collect fear throughout the session and to be able to utilize it in combat in so many different ways. It really feels like non-combat encounters, such as social or environmental, can also bring some serious consequences, and depending on how those things go, it can really snowball later. So I really like the fear mechanic, and it stacks in so well with combat in those action tokens as well. And speaking to the overall flow of the game, this game runs smooth. Everything feels like it's just being propelled forward, like there's a narrative that is coming out, and your players are a part of it. And D&D 5e can feel like that too, but the fact that in the one-shot I played, we were all completely new to the game, and we didn't know each other, but it still sailed so smoothly, I think is testament to the system. And the way that combat works, I could see it being so easy to integrate a chase scene, or a trap, or even a social encounter into the middle of a combat, and it still feel fresh and not breaking the combat in any way. In terms of combat itself, battle never felt so alive to me as it did in Daggerheart. I've played a lot of 5e and I love the system and I love the combat, but it can be a little immersion breaking going through initiative. Here, without initiative, it really felt like there was a constant back and forth between the enemies and the players. There was an ebb and a flow to the combat. You'd have the enemies rise up and attack and deal some deadly damage to the players, and they would rally and mount an offense back. And it really felt like this wave going back and forth, and it felt so smooth seeing that. I think that it's a lot more engaging than the standard 5e combat. How many times have your players been scrolling on their phone while they're waiting for their turn to come up? Because sometimes an entire round can take forever. In Daggerheart, it's not really like that, because there is no turn order, so your turn could pop up any time. So you're always looking for something interesting you can do to contribute. And even if you're not going to take an action, you can still help people, and that's not an action. So yeah, if someone's about to attack, you can aid them in that attack, and that can be really narratively great to have two people fighting together, but they can lend their strength to the allies, even though it's not their turn, as long as they have hope. Also, there's some abilities that just don't even take you to roll an action, so you can theoretically do that at any point in time. So I think support classes could be really interesting because you can really just jump in there right as a momentous occasion is about to happen. And then tag team is also a really cool option where you can have multiple players fighting together to do a really cool combo. In 5e, you can attempt that through multi-turns, or you can just flavor it to be that way. And yeah, it seems fine. I mean, flavor's free, but in Daggerheart, the fact that it's narratively built in and the combat just flows so well, it seems like it'll be a really fun time to do combat, especially once your party gets into a groove and knows the system and knows each other really well. Lastly, even if you're not doing the help or doing a tag team, just the fact that when something big happens that your ally does, you can immediately just take your turn right after. You don't need to wait a while for your turn to finally show up so that you can complement your ally's attack. No, you can just take it right there and keep mounting that offense, and so it really builds up tension. If you have an ally that runs up right next to you and delivers a mighty blow to the enemy in front of you and almost kills them, doesn't it make so much narrative sense just for you to continue that fight and just defeat them? Whereas in an initiative order, you'd have to jump back to the other side of the battlefield maybe, go through a bunch of other people's turns, maybe that monster gets to go. It really breaks that, and that momentum that you can build up in Daggerheart feels great. Yes, there are some people that are concerned that you'll have one player hogging up all the turns or all the spotlight and it's going to ruin the game for everybody. Well, there's a couple options. One, the game suggests that you can have multiple action trackers so that everybody will put their actions on their own action tracker so you can see who has taken more moves and who hasn't. If you have somebody who is unaware that they're hogging all the spotlight and they don't want to, that will easily remedy it. They'll see they're taking way more actions than other people and they'll tone it down. Option 2, if you have somebody that does know and doesn't care that they're hogging all the spotlight, you can enforce this rule that each player has to act once before another player can act again. There, problem solved. One other thing that I did enjoy, but I feel like I need a little more experience to fully comment on, is it felt like combat is less swingy. It feels like players hit a lot more often, and this is probably due to the binomial distribution of rolling 2 dice instead of just 1, but it also feels like because of the way the armor works and the HP works, it is just a little easier to predict how things are going to go in battle. And I think due to the action economy of this game, it's going to be really easy to balance encounters, and they also have good options for increasing or decreasing the difficulty of an enemy. And as a GM, running combat feels a lot of fun because you have a lot of options. You can exchange out some fear for action or vice versa. You can spend that fear in different ways. You can also have fear effects in your encounter, so you can choose how the battle goes in a lot of different ways. I really like that. But this kind of leads me into some of our negative points. The fact that you as a GM are orchestrating the combat like it's a dance. It can be really fun, but also I think it can sound or feel a bit manipulative. Because GMs have so much more leeway on how things go in Daggerheart, I'm not rolling dice to see if the effect sticks or not. In fact, as a GM, it literally says you decide when an effect wears off. So if the player has, something to hold them down so they're vulnerable, you could, as a GM, immediately just remove that condition. But you want to leave it on for a little bit so they feel like they got some use out of it. This kind of feels like it's a pat on the head for the players to say, oh, you're doing a good job. But in 5e, I like how you just roll dice and the gods kind of decide, oh, he's still restrained or he's not. I get that it has narrative benefit because, yeah, you get to decide if the big bad is actually that big and bad. This can be really tough as a GM to balance. You don't want your players to feel like you're pitying them, but also you don't want your players to feel like the abilities they've done are useless. Thankfully, though, there aren't a lot of conditions, and the conditions aren't that bad anyway. It's not like being stunned in 5e. Now, if you are on the side of those who like to optimize or min-max your characters, this game likely won't be your cup of tea, or it just won't be as satisfying to your optimizer side. I say this because, yeah, there are going to be some options that are better than others, but the game is kind of light in terms of its crunch, and it's so narratively driven that I feel like even if you were to optimize, it doesn't give as much oomph to your character as it does in 5e. So I could see that feeling unsatisfying to players. And one other really bad part of this playtest is that the document is just really poorly designed. The information that you need is spread out all over the document in different places. It doesn't say anything in a really clear and concise way. It gives a bunch of examples that are totally the opposite of what it just said in the text, so it leaves you kind of wondering which one's right. I really hope this will be cleared up in the future editions, but I think the way that it's designed and the way that it's trying to teach people to play has already caused some trouble because the community, I think, misunderstands a lot of the things that it's trying to do. Overall, I really enjoyed running Daggerheart. It ran really smooth. And if you are a 5e GM, I think you're not going to have many problems at all jumping into a game of Daggerheart and doing your best. I'd say just don't be hard on yourself to find those success with fear rolls, and just try to ease yourself into it and see what makes sense narratively and get the game under your belt before you stress about it. And yeah, this game isn't for everybody. No game is. But I think a lot more people will enjoy it than you might originally think. And obviously, if you have a problem player in 5e, you're going to have a problem player in Daggerheart too. So don't lay that problem at the feet of the system. So those are my thoughts and my summary, and if you want more Daggerheart content, let me know by, doing stuff to the video. Liking, subscribing, commenting. Have a good day.